The air in the room thickened, tasting of damp earth and something faintly metallic. Every hair on his body stood rigid, prickling against the clammy, unnatural cold seeping from the walls. A low, wet scratching sound began, not from one direction but from everywhere at once. His lungs seized, refusing to draw a full breath, as if the very oxygen had turned to syrup. Then came the whispers. A dozen overlapping voices speaking a language that felt wrong in his bones. It wasn't a presence he felt. It was an absence so profound it felt like a physical weight, pressing him into the floor. This was the true horror. Not a monster in the dark, but the terrifying realization that the dark itself was alive, and it was listening. Silence is the loudest sound in the world, because in that stillness, you can hear things you were never meant to hear. A man's voice whispers, "I can hear my own heart, not beating, rotting." The channel logo slams onto the screen. We cut to the backstory. A bright, sunny day on a suburban street in Columbus, Ohio. Narrator. David Miller's life in Columbus, Ohio, was a portrait of quiet contentment. He was a graphic designer who found his greatest joy in simple routines. His wife Sarah's laugh, the weight of their dog at his feet, the scent of charcoal on a Sunday afternoon. It was a life built on familiar sounds and comforting smells, a world that felt solid and predictable. But that was 6 months ago, before the predictable world he knew began to quietly fray at the edges. Life was comfortable, predictable, mundane. He was David, 30, with the kind of gentle face that made strangers smile back. And there, across from him, was Sarah, his anchor in the quiet rhythm of their days. It was a snapshot of perfect, ordinary contentment, the kind you only realize was fragile once it begins to crack. David sat at his desk, bathed in warm afternoon light, the world still serene and whole, but everything shattered after a routine bike ride. A patch of loose stones, a wrenching loss of balance, and an impact that felt, in the moment, deceptively survivable. The aftermath. A fractured wrist, bruised ribs, and the first subtle fracture in his reality. The ER patched him up, sent him home with painkillers. "You'll be sore for a few weeks," they said, and he was. The painkillers dulled the edge, but a deep, throbbing ache remained. A constant, gnawing reminder. Every movement was a fresh jolt, a sharp, metallic taste of iron blooming in his mouth with each wince. The physical ache subsided, but then came something new. Not a sound heard through his ears, but one that seemed to originate from deep within his own skull. A low, persistent hum. It felt less like hearing, and more like a pressure, a vibration that resonated with the very marrow of his bones. David dismissed it as tinnitus, a strange byproduct of the trauma. He described it to Sarah as a distant refrigerator hum, an annoyance that was just manageable. But the hum began to shift, its frequency dropping into something thick and resonant. The air in the room grew dense with it, a pressure that wasn't sound, but a presence. It began to differentiate. In the oppressive stillness of 2 a.m., David didn't just hear a noise, he felt it. A vibration in the marrow of his bones, a pressure against his eardrums that wasn't sound. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and something faintly metallic, like old copper. He heard processes. The gurgling sludge of his digestion became a distinct, wet journey he could map from esophagus to intestine. The slick, muscular pulse of blood through specific arteries resonated in his ears. It was as if someone had turned his body's volume up to 11. Every internal function now announced itself with unsettling clarity. The room was silent. But within David's body, a grotesque symphony played, the wet slide of fluids, the soft throb of his own pulse. His voice strained, raw with a tension that thickened the air. "Sarah, can you hear that?" From the pillow beside him, Sarah's sleepy murmur was a whisper of normalcy. "Hear what, honey? It's silent." But the silence she spoke of was an illusion, shattered by the intimate, internal cacophony only he could perceive. David's voice dropped to a strained whisper. "No, it's like a factory in there, a wet, pumping factory." He sat rigid in the cold examination chair, the scent of antiseptic and something faintly metallic hanging in the air. Their gazes felt like a physical pressure, cool and assessing, as they studied him. The quiet hum of medical equipment was the only sound, underscoring the profound, terrifying disconnect between his visceral reality and their clinical disbelief. Despite countless MRIs and CT scans, doctors found nothing, just sterile reports and dismissive diagnoses. "Psychosomatic," one doctor suggested, his tone clinical and detached, while another murmured about anxiety manifesting as auditory hallucinations. The air in the room grew heavy with the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee, a stark contrast to the creeping dread that lingered. They prescribed sedatives, a temporary silence bought with pills. But the whispers in the dark only grew more insistent. The pills blunted the edge, but they also blunted him. Beneath the chemical haze, the sounds not only persisted, they began to change. The healthy lub-dub of a heart began to develop a faint, gritty rasp. Then came the day of the first decay. David bit into the apple, the crisp crunch echoing in his skull. Then, from the pit of his being, a soft, wet collapse whispered up, a sound of internal ruin. His gaze fell to his own hand, the skin seeming to shift and settle with a sickening finality. This wasn't digestion, it was dissolution. It's failure. I hear the minute breakdown. Wear and tear isn't a concept. It's a soundtrack. A faint, sandy rasp whispers from my joints. Every movement grinds with that dry, crumbling sound. A microscopic, fibrous tear in a muscle fiber after I stretched. Now David sits gaunt and hollow-eyed in a soundproof basement cell. The air in his makeshift prison is thick, with the stale scent of foam and sweat. David had become a captive of sound itself. He abandoned his career and transformed a room into a sealed chamber, begging Sarah for perfect silence. Soon, he accused her of breathing too loudly, then claimed even the rhythm of her heart was an intolerable intrusion. The loving, normal fabric of their marriage began to fray under this bizarre, invisible strain. Sarah was left trapped, watching their life disintegrate over a horror only he could perceive. On the phone with her friend, Sarah's voice cracked with tears as she described the look in his eyes. "It's not just terror," she whispered. "It's pity, like he's witnessing my slow death, and I'm completely unaware." The air in the soundproof room grew thick with the scent of ozone and cold dread. Every muscle in his body was locked, paralyzed by a terror so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on him. The sound design swelled into a grotesque, overwhelming cacophony. David had reached the point of no return. The body's symphony twisted into a dirge of decay. A healthy heartbeat echoed, then warped into something wet and wrong. The lub turned viscous. The dub acquired a faint, gurgling sputter. Beneath it, a new sound emerged. A faint, desiccated, papery rustling. David. No, not that. Please not that. Narrator. He recognized it instantly. It was the sound of his own sanity beginning to fray, a dry whisper from a place no stethoscope could ever reach. A faint rustling began, like whispers from within. It was the sound of microscopic plaques fracturing, a noise no stethoscope could ever detect. He was hearing the earliest murmurs of arteriosclerosis. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and iron as this internal whispering continued. Decades before any medical scan could detect it, David could hear his own cardiovascular system beginning to fail. In the oppressive quiet of his apartment, he perceived the sluggish strain of his liver processing toxins. He heard the slight, sticky resistance as the alveoli in his lungs struggled to exchange gases. A cold, metallic taste filled his mouth as the horrifying truth settled in his bones. He didn't have diseases. He was listening to his body slowly dying. Not yet, but I can hear the potential. I can hear the exact, specific path my body will take to the grave. A metallic taste filled my mouth as the air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and old rust. Sarah came into the basement, her breath pitching as she found the soundproof room door ajar. Sarah peered through the glass to see David inside, motionless, his headphones abandoned on the desk. He seemed locked in a trance, his attention fixed on something she couldn't perceive. "David?" She called, her voice trembling. "David, talk to me," without turning. His voice emerged flat and hollow. "Your left kidney," a crystalline whisper, almost imperceptible, lingered in the damp air. A tiny stone was taking shape deep within him. Perhaps in 5 years it would be fully formed. A faint metallic taste of ozone accompanied the silent warning. "You should drink more water." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, not in fear of him, but in heartbroken terror for him. In that moment, she didn't see a madman. She saw a prophet cursed with the most intimate, terrible knowledge imaginable. A man forced to listen to the inevitable, slow-motion demolition of his own mind. At 9:30, the conclusion began. The facility is sterile, hushed. David gazes through a window at a manicured garden. Specialists now treat him without dismissing his experience. They believe the trauma forged a monstrous neural pathway. His somatosensory and auditory cortices have fused in a rare, chilling anomaly. He doesn't hear conventionally. Instead, his mind translates the raw, biological data of his own body into a constant, internal soundscape. He is a living, breathing medical scan. Sarah visits. The air thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and something metallic. They sit quietly. The only sound, the faint, irregular drip from a nearby IV. She reaches out and takes his cold, unresponsive hand in hers, her touch the only warmth in the room. He doesn't flinch. He and Sarah are trying, piece by broken piece, to rebuild. But the question hangs in every silent room, in every shared glance. David looks directly at the camera, as if through the YouTube screen. His eyes are clear, filled with a bottomless, weary pity. To the audience, softly. You think you're healthy, you feel fine, but how do you truly know? The decay doesn't begin with pain. It starts with a single, silent, microscopic failure. A failure that exists beyond human perception. A failure I can hear. The camera holds on his face as the narrator's voice fades. What if the truth about our bodies isn't a feeling, but a sound? And what if the only man who can hear it is listening to his own end, note by terrible note? The faint, distorted heartbeat from the hook returns, now stuttering with a sickening irregularity. A faint, brittle crackle whispered from within the darkness. The screen dissolved into a void, swallowing the last glimmer of light. Then, stark white text materialized on the abyss. It read, "Some prisons have no bars."